views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Bronxnet or the program underwriters.
Now that I know which month we're in, pursuant to Chapter 4, Section 85, and Chapter 69, Section 2706 of the New York City Charter, a joint meeting of the Bronx Borough Service Cabinet and Bronx Borough Board will take place right here in virtual land on today, Thursday, October 28th, 2021, beginning at 10 a.m. And we will start with our first agenda item, which requires a vote. It is the Open Restaurants Text Amendment. And you all are aware of that, but we're going to have a presentation by New York City Planning and New York City Department of Transportation. And I do not have in front of me the names of the presenters. So will you introduce yourself as you come on, and then also share your screen so we can all see your presentation? Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Deputy Navardo Lopez, New York City DOT.
Friend of the Bronx, Navardo Lopez.
I'm going to be presenting, and then with me today from the Department of City Planning, Carolyn Grossman-Meager, who will be handling the city planning portion of the presentation.
Great, and Navardo confirming I'll share screen for both of us. Great, I'll pull that up right now.
Carolyn, are you able to do the full screen just because I have like the next slide showing
we're not. Okay, let me try again.
Yeah, sometimes with presenter view, PowerPoint, you might just need to tell it to swap the screens. Perfect.
Okay, great. All right, can you move to the next slide, actually? Okay, perfect. So good morning, everybody. For the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be taking us through where things stand from a more programmatic standpoint with the permanent restaurants, which will continue to give restaurants the option of sidewalk and roadway seating for outdoor dining. The program will look to better balance the many needs of the street, sidewalk, keeping both restaurants and other users in mind. We are going to take what has and what hasn't worked in the past, both the pre-COVID and now during the emergency when developing the future guidelines. I want to make clear that while this presentation will cover both sidewalk and roadway dining, DOT and City Planning are asking the Borough Board for your opinion on the specific sidewalk cafe text amendment. Next slide. As you know, the city had street and sidewalk cafes before COVID, but far fewer of them. The majority of the program was administered by the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. DOT did run one small pilot of the public roadway seating, which we call street seats, but there were only 25 setups citywide. Our understanding is that the relatively low participation in both programs was in large part due to cost and process. Next. Next slide. During COVID, New York City suspended existing rules through an emergency executive order, and DOT was directed to create the Open Restaurants program, allowing restaurants to conduct their business in the public right-of-way. Since launch back in 2020, over 11,000 restaurants have participated, which has helped save about 100,000 jobs. By many accounts, this program has been a lifesaver, not just to the restaurant industry, but also to the city that has seen outdoor dining and the incredible vitality it can bring to our sidewalks. Of course, there have been successes and challenges over the past year. We've learned both positive and negative lessons in that time, and those lessons are critical to informing how we proceed with a permanent program. On the positive side, we think the robust use of the emergency program was helped by three things. First, unlike the pre-emergency sidewalk cafe program, no geographies were off limits. Any restaurant with ground floor frontage and sidewalk or roadway space that met the criteria could participate. Second, the program was free and easy to access, unlike the pre-COVID sidewalk cafe program, which required months of multiple reviews by several different city agencies. And third, the element of roadway dining gave restaurants brand new options for their businesses, particularly those that might not have enough room on the sidewalk to accommodate a cafe. However, it is worth noting a few lessons from the emergency program. First, the speed of the rollout and the fact that the program was built from scratch under emergency circumstances created some confusion. As DOT learned more about operating a program like this, and the program was extended by the mayor into the winter, some of the guidelines had to change along the way in order to keep everyone safe. Second, throughout the program, DOT learned more about the challenges specific to the roadway seating and its interaction with the roadway. For instance, we've heard from other agencies such as FDNY and MTA that there were issues with turning radius for large vehicles and also problems with safety signs having their view blocked. Safety is of the utmost importance here and will remain so. So we will continue to work with our agency partners on that. And lastly, enforcement has been complicated on multiple fronts. On the one hand, you have restaurants who are dealing with a lot and who felt squeezed and over-inspected by too many people. On the other hand, you had some communities, particularly the mobility impaired, concerned about under-enforcement. Next slide. That being said, the program has seen tremendous participation. And in this past April, the City Council overwhelmingly voted in favor of the bill to make the program permanent. This required changing a number of different laws that control outdoor dining in non-emergency situations. Next slide. I'm going to talk a bit about what we're proposing for the permanent program and then return to the topic of the legal changes needed to effectuate it. To start, we anticipate that, as in the emergency, DOT will administer a permanent program for both sidewalk seating and roadway seating with similar rules to the current sidewalk cafes, but available citywide. We want to be sensitive to the traveling public, minding clear sidewalk paths and other rules around sound and hours of operation. Next slide. When finalized, specific design guidelines will be very clear and will revolve around these principles that balance the use of sidewalk space by a restaurant, but maximize the experience of openness and activation to the general public. For most of the city, we're proposing requiring 8-foot clear paths or half the sidewalk width, whichever is greater. But in some areas that have higher foot traffic, the city is proposing 12-foot clear paths or half the sidewalk width. And for other special cases where it may still make sense, despite having a narrow sidewalk, we are looking at a waiver to go down to 6 feet, which will be co-reviewed by DOT and the Mayor's Office of Peoples with Disabilities. Next slide. Switching gears, we think the introduction of the roadway option is a tremendous new opportunity for restaurants, especially those with narrow sidewalks. The city is working on how this will be set up permanently, but we will have set up in the parking lane, accepting prohibited zones, maintain public safety, and have clear guidance and enforcement on sound and also comply with ADA requirements. In the future, any roadway setup will have to look a lot more like what's in this slide and not the fully enclosed structures that we've seen a lot of in the past year and a half. Next slide. The city is proposing that the new program will not operate during colder months, but with some opportunity for a hardship waiver that would allow restaurants to keep their setups in place. For now, all restaurants will be able to keep operating uninterrupted through this upcoming winter season. Next slide. In looking at both moving the legal authority to run the program at DOT and in creating a new process for the roadway setups, the city is looking to streamline the review process as much as possible, while leaving in place the essential roles of agency and public review. Next slide. In order to make this permanent program a reality, 3 steps are needed to advance. First, the focus for today is the removal of locational prohibitions through zoning. It's the key to unlocking the full citywide universe of applicability and consolidating control and accountability for the program under a single agency. We are also working with the City Council, who strongly support the program, to enact appropriate legislation that will update the laws governing sidewalk cafes and then create a new set of laws and rules to govern roadway cafes. Next slide. Following zoning and legal change, we soon anticipate that rulemaking will formalize many of the program design and application details and then open up a formal application window for the new program. We are in the process of developing the future program. While we're in the process of developing the future program, the current emergency program is expected to be in effect as is for the next 1.5 years. The expectation is that restaurants will have ample time to transition into a new process if they choose to, with minimal operational disruption. Changing zoning is the first critical step to making this program permanent, but as you could see on this timeline, there are multiple steps to developing a full program. Each step welcomes public input and review involved. Next slide. COVID-19 has really shaped the way New Yorkers think about how our streets can be used, which has been a silver lining to the pandemic. We welcome feedback and encourage all to visit our website to submit comments to us as we are developing the elements of the permanent program. Once again, the roadway portion of this presentation is preliminary, and our primary purpose in presenting to the Borough Board is to gather feedback on City Planning's proposed text amendment changes, specifically related to sidewalk cafes. With that in mind, I'll turn it back to Carolyn at City Planning to talk about those changes.
Thanks, Navardo, and thank you, Madam Deputy, Community Board colleagues, Council colleagues. I'm very happy to be here today. My name is Carolyn Grossman-Marr from the Department of City Planning, and I'm going to take over talking specifically about the zoning text amendment component of this overall program, which, as Navardo has described, is one element, the first element that is coming before the Borough Board to act on enacting the permanent open restaurants program. This text amendment is specific to sidewalk cafes and specific to the locations of where sidewalk cafes can exist in the city. So what the zoning text amendment does is removes the entirety of Chapter 1, Article 4 of the zoning resolution and a series of other related texts that appear in special districts and other areas, which fully removes zoning from the overall regulation and dictating the locations of where cafes can occur in the city. So the effect of this is to allow restaurants to apply to DOT and for DOT to set all of the eligibility based on siting criteria, such as clear path and sidewalk conditions that Navardo discussed, and which have historically been part of the sidewalk cafe program as it was previously administered under the Department of Consumer and Workforce Protection. So sidewalk cafes obviously have a long history in the New York City streetscape, and with them, the laws governing how cafes work have evolved over many decades. When ULURP came into existence in the 1970s, every individual cafe was subjected to a full ULURP review as part of the revocable consent process to use street space. Almost immediately at that time, it was recognized that that level of review and scrutiny was onerous and time-consuming and difficult to manage for each individual restaurant and all of the other parties within ULURP. So in 1980, the City Planning Commission put into place a framework that attempted to streamline that process by naming specific areas of the city where sidewalk cafes could be allowed. Since that time, the sidewalk cafe locational rules have been amended many dozens of times to make more and more fine-grained distinctions on where and what kinds of cafes are allowed in different areas of the city. Up until COVID-19, zoning was working as the gatekeeper to where a sidewalk cafe could exist. So if you were applying to DCWP for a sidewalk cafe, question 1 was, look at the zoning map. Are you in an area that allows them? If no, stop. If yes, now move forward into all of the citing criteria and other community board referral processes associated with the sidewalk cafe. So under those zoning rules, which are currently suspended, zoning has 3 different kinds of cafes that are outlined and outlined where in the city they can be located. There's the most commonly seen kind, an unenclosed sidewalk cafe, which allows for readily removable tables, chairs, and fencing with no allowable overhead coverage other than umbrellas and retractable roofs. There's a small sidewalk cafe, which is like an unenclosed cafe, but no larger than 4.5 feet wide. And then there's an enclosed cafe, which is defined as an extension of a building into the sidewalk using light building materials and with transparency requirements. So zoning, as I said, holds the geographic restrictions of where these different kinds are allowed. You can still see this map, though it is suspended, on the DCP website, zola.planning.nyc.gov. You can see on the citywide view of how the sidewalk cafe rules work. So in yellow are areas that allow only a small cafe. In purple are areas that allow a small or a regular unenclosed cafe. In green are areas that allow any kind of cafe. And importantly, you can see a lot of areas where cafes are not allowed at all. And again, this is even where the sidewalks are wide and conditions otherwise would have allowed it, and where community boards may have wanted them, the zoning simply precluded it. So in red, there are those are areas that are specifically prohibited from having cafes, and blue are all the residential areas of the city. And I'll come back to how cafes work in those areas in particular. So as Navardo described, the Open Restaurants Program suspended all of these rules and has allowed for a very robust open outdoor dining culture to exist during the emergency program. To date, over 11,000 restaurants are participating in open restaurants. In particular, we have seen a huge surge in outdoor dining outside of Manhattan, which was not the case in the pre-COVID sidewalk cafe program. And of those 11,500 restaurants that are participating in outdoor dining, 10,000 of them are using the sidewalk, which is really what's relevant to us in thinking about this zoning condition. So of those 10,000, 2,500 of the restaurants that are participating are permitted in areas that would have been prohibited or limited under the existing zoning laws. So this proposed text amendment would allow those restaurants the possibility of participating in the future programs. So looking at the map on the right, again, in red are existing open restaurants on sidewalk cafes that are in areas that are specifically prohibited by zoning. They include commercial mid-blocks, certain special districts, under elevated rail lines, and in yellow are the areas that are limited by the small cafe designation. And then in blue, again, are all the areas, the restaurants that exist in residential areas. Now, zoning doesn't typically allow a restaurant to exist in a residential area, but across the city, we have about 3,000 restaurants that exist in residential areas because they predate the residential zoning being in place. About 1,000 of those restaurants, we estimate, are currently participating in the Open Restaurants Program. So that's all the blue dots, is those 1,000 restaurants that exist in residential areas that otherwise could not have cafes, but are able to under the emergency setup. So again, why have we had these prohibitions in the past? There are many different reasons why different areas had prohibitions. So under elevated railways, for instance, I think historically people believed that there was a conflict between the noise and potential dust associated with an elevated structure. We think that these decisions were made many, many decades ago. But what we've seen is that cafes can work in many more areas than zoning had previously contemplated. So, for instance, in the top left here, we have a cafe in Bushwick under an elevated railway. And we think that this is actually activating the railway commercial corridors in a positive way. What's important is that the sidewalk conditions are wide enough to allow for pedestrians, and that's a siting criteria and not a neighborhood criteria. So we think a better rule would be to allow for more areas to potentially participate, but make sure that we're still protecting pedestrian path and other operational rules that allow for a successful restaurant. Again, other areas, central business districts, certain special districts were just left out of the program, and the residential districts, as I mentioned, where you would have had to go through a full ULURP to get a commercial rezoning just to put a few tables and chairs outside. So we really think this is alleviating a burden, creating more potential for neighborhoods, while still maintaining all of the tools we need to make sure that the restaurants that do take advantage of this have criteria that protects their relationship to the neighborhoods in which they're in. A few other small actions that exist in the text amendment include removing definitions and cross-references to cafes, removing text that would preclude an operable window, like you see in the picture here, a takeout window that allows for connections between the interior restaurant space and exterior, as well as removing enclosure provisions that allow for an indoor restaurant to be physically accessible to an outdoor cafe. Those occur in some commercial districts, as well as clarifying that sidewalk widening zoning. So if your sidewalk was widened as a condition of a zoning requirement, that does not preclude you from participating in the cafe program in the future. And again, that's really so that we can have a plain language understanding of what a sidewalk is. And anyone who's measuring it can look at the building, can look at the curb, and it doesn't matter how your sidewalk was built. You have the same physical rules for protecting clear path as anybody else. So zooming into the Bronx just a little bit, you can see here again those colors of how the sidewalk cafe rules work. Many commercial corridors in green in the Bronx do allow for cafes. However, you can see in red a number of important areas that have prohibitions. Special districts like Hunts Point and Port Morris do not allow for cafes. Certain portions of the Grand Concourse do not allow for cafes, and all of the commercial corridors that have elevated rail lines, so Westchester Avenue, Jerome, White Plains Road, portions of Broadway, did not allow for sidewalk cafes pre-COVID, as well as all of the blue areas, which are the residential districts of the Bronx, do not allow for sidewalk cafes. Pre-COVID, unsurprisingly, and I think quite familiar to all of you, there were very few sidewalk cafes that existed in the Bronx. 25 unenclosed and 5 enclosed cafes, and you can see those here in the purple and in the green. Under the emergency program, there are 600 cafes currently operating in the Bronx. 250 of those are on the sidewalk, and 300 of those are using both sidewalk and roadway. You can see those mapped on the right here, color-coded again to how they relate to the pre-COVID, to the zoning rules. So in red, we have 109 operating sidewalk cafes that would not be allowed, that are specifically prohibited by zoning. You can see those clustered again in Port Morris, a few in Hunts Point, along Westchester Avenue, along Grand Concourse and Jerome, and a few in North Bronx along Broadway and White Plains. And you can also see in blue dots 58 residential area cafes that are also operating and also would be precluded under the zoning. So, when we think about the text amendment, what we're really trying to do here is allow those 170 or so some odd sidewalk cafes the opportunity to apply in the non-emergency setting, because otherwise a future program may leave these restaurants out. So, to summarize all and go back to where Navarro left us, there's a multi-pronged legislative process. The text amendment itself was referred out in June, so we have officially passed the deadline, but of course, we're still listening to many comments and feedbacks. This is a long process. We had a public hearing at the City Planning Commission, which is now contemplating its actions on this as well. We expect that the text amendment will go to the City Council later this year, along with some of the legislative changes that Navarro described. Those legislative changes would be followed by rulemaking that could affect, for instance, the sidewalk cafe program, which exists. Again, all of those citing criteria and design rules exist under DCWP, but there may be opportunities to tweak and improve them a little bit, as well as all of the rules really fleshing out that roadway program, which will happen into next year. And we should also make sure that we mention that there is a process that has been announced by DOT for design review and development of those roadway rules. So stay tuned, and there will be many more opportunities for engagement on those elements as well. All of this, again, with the intent of culminating a full legal package into late 2022 that would allow for new applications on the permanent process to start. So again, community boards should also be thinking about that, because come the end of next year, there may be new permanent applications coming your way for the program, with the expectation that 2022 to 2023 is the process for people coming into and being accepted into the new permanent program. And with that, I'll pull my screen down, and I think Navarro and I would be happy to take questions.
Question?
Okay, thank you so much for that, for your presentation. Can you unshare your screen? Okay, perfect. As usual, we had a great presentation. Now, are there any questions regarding the presentation? If so, now's the time to raise your hand virtually. That button can be found in the menu side. I get a little bit confused where, depending on the actual program we're using, but do we have any hands, Chris? Let's go to
Yeah.
Okay.
So, well, yeah, real quick, a few people have raised their hands already. For those on the phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand if you'd like to do so. And yeah, first hand I saw was up a few minutes ago. Roberto Crespo, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chris, and Madam Chair. I want to thank you, and also to the presenters. Thank you. I see that there was a portion that was stated that this amendment is, at first it appeared to be both sidewalk and roadway, and at the end I hear that it's only sidewalks and not roadways, which is what the commissioner had stated. I need clarification on that side. Is it going to be both or just a sidewalk? I need total clarification. And also, I have a second question, is throughout this whole entire process, I have not seen any community board involvement at all. So if we're going to vote on this, I know we're voting on this particular amendment, but I believe that community boards should be involved throughout the entire process, because we're the ones that know the community better than any city agency and how it's going to affect the community. So my second question is community board involvement in the process, in the entire process.
Sure, I'll take that. Navarro, please jump in if you have anything to add. Thank you for the question. First, I want to confirm that the action that's in front of the board today is exclusively about the sidewalk cafes and the locational prohibitions. So Navarro, what he presented was really to give a sense of the overall program, but that is still very much in development. There are a lot of steps to really move into a permanent open restaurants program. The permanent open restaurants program will involve roadway cafes, but that is not in front of the borough board right now. What is in front of the borough board is an action that is specifically limited to allowing the sidewalk cafe program to exist in those additional areas that I showed. We have for this element of the program actually been out to more than 100 community board meetings throughout the Bronx and of course across the entire city. So that process has been underway for many months, but that's really just the first stop in what is going to be, as I described, a year-long process to really develop all of these elements of the program. So specific to the roadway, and I think a lot of questions around how those will physically and operationally work. There's a lot of work to do in terms of making those rules. And there will be, as I mentioned, there's been announced a public engagement process to develop those rules, where there will be many opportunities for community boards to participate in that. So that is still underway. That's not what's in front of the board, but those are being, the opportunities to involve the community boards in that development process are very much in mind. And then when it comes to review, I want to again state the DCWP Sidewalk Cafe program has and is required by charter to review every application, to send every application for review to the community boards. We are not changing that rule. So when these sidewalk cafes do start coming through the process, those applications will still come in front of you. So there are, again, we have already been working with the community boards on this limited action. There will be a lot more opportunities to work with the community boards on the development of the design rules for roadways, which are really new. And there will be continuing involvement with community boards on the ongoing application review as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Ken Brown, Ken, I saw your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Deputy Borough President, and thank you for the presentation. Presented to our general board meeting last night. Thank you very much. Couple of questions. One is reiterative from last night. When authority is transferred to DOT, will there be construction and aesthetic guidelines embedded into the regulations?
So they actually already are, right? I think DCWP, I think as many of you will be familiar with, from pre-COVID days, though they seem so many decades ago in our minds. There are very extensive aesthetic and operational guidelines associated with the Sidewalk Cafe program. So that entire body of law is being transferred. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities to tweak those rules and modernize them. Navarro mentioned one, for instance, in his presentation, where the city feels that because we are for the first time going to allow cafes in congested areas of the city, like Grand Central, that it's important that we have a 12-foot clear path requirement, where only in the past we had an 8-foot clear path requirement. So that would be an amendment to those rules, but all of the existing rules are expected to primarily remain, with some opportunities to to sort of move around the edges, versus the roadway rules, where that body did not exist. So that entire set of design rules are being built from scratch.
Okay. Do we have any more hands, Chris?
Yep, I just saw George Torres's hand come up. So George, go ahead.
And actually, if I might just add to that answer also, things that are important, like hours of operation and the sound rules, and sort of set up cleanliness, those are also in the DCWP program and are being carried over. Again, some thoughts about how they might be improved, but those are rules that are being held consistent with the previous program.
Hey, thank you. We had our presentation quite some time ago as a community board. The community board was supportive, but the mayor just recently made a determination, for example, on the portable gas heaters, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, that they're not going to be permissible going forward. So I know that you spoke a little bit about these structures, especially in the winter, not operating in the wintertime because they won't have that. Or is the city looking at alternatives for this? Are they like electric heaters? Like, what do you guys speak to on that?
So Navarro, again, feel free to jump in. I know some of this gets into DOT policy, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but first I want to just clarify that the Sidewalk Cafe program is technically year-round. The reality is many restaurants don't use it year-round, prior to COVID, because unless it's an emergency, people don't necessarily want to eat outdoors, even with heaters. So I think we'll see how useful it is, but they're allowed to keep the sidewalks up year-round, and that won't change. The issue is really about the roadway setups and their seasonality. There are a number of reasons why it's important that they be seasonal. Not having propane heaters, which is a real concern from the fire department, is one of the reasons, but it's also important because it will allow for more roadway work and other operational functions like repaving the streets to happen in a consistent way. If we didn't have that, for instance, you might have restaurants being disturbed in the middle of the summer for road repaving, and this allows for a little bit more rationalization of that process. So there are a number of reasons that program is being considered for seasonal use. And again, I would say seasonal, and also that removability. We've seen a lot of people, sort of building full structures and nailing into the sidewalk, which, though technically not allowed under the emergency, is obviously widespread. That has been a real challenge when you have Con Ed needing to get into a manhole, or you have drainage that's being blocked and creating, flooding problems on a street. So there's a lot of reasons that we think moving in that direction, to that temporary and removable for the roadway portion is really important, and the right balance once we're out of the emergency condition, right? Again, this is really planning for the future permanent, right? That we're talking about 2023 when those things would start to happen, with the assumption that a restaurant won't need the space, that it will still be good and useful, but we won't be in such a critical need, and so we can go back to balancing that infrastructure need as well. But and to just make sure on heaters, so on the sidewalk, the electric heaters have always historically been allowed. You do see that that's the most frequent kind for the sidewalk, sort of installed into the building.
I do have a second part of the question in terms of the sidewalk space. We've seen recently, especially here in the North Bronx, competition for sidewalk space with scooters, for example. We also have in my district, we have 2 elevated lines, the 2 train and the 5 train, the Dyer Avenue and the White Plains Road. We're now getting bike lanes. I understand that program is being extended all across the city, Roosevelt Avenue, any Broadway, stuff like that. Again, that's part of the roadway conversation, but on the now, we have people that are competing. You're taking away sidewalk space with the addition of these permanent cafes, outdoor cafes. You also have scooters. Is that 12-foot width or 8-foot width inclusive of scooter pads that are on sidewalks and not in streets?
So Carolyn, I can take this because it touches upon the e-scooter pilot. Good morning, George. So,
Morning.
As you remember, when we talked about the e-scooter pilot, for the locations that are by elevated trains, that are by commercial corridors, we wanted to have corrals, specific areas where individuals who use the scooters can park them once they're finished. You're not allowed to ride an e-scooter on the sidewalk. It's not allowed anywhere in the city. That's standard, in our rules in the ad code. The rules for e-scooters are the same as the rules for any other vehicle. You cannot ride them on the sidewalk. But in the very crowded locations with a lot of foot traffic, we wanted to have a more controlled parking process than simply having someone being able to leave them on, anywhere on the sidewalk. So we want the corrals. We want people to park in specific locations. That 12 feet is on top of that. So, think of the sidewalk corral as like a tree pit on a sidewalk. If you have a sidewalk as a tree pit and you also want to put a sidewalk cafe, well, the tree pit area is not part of the 12 feet. It has to be 12 feet beyond the tree pit 12 feet between the tree pit and where your chairs and tables are. Same thing for a corral. If there's a corral on the sidewalk and you're a restaurant that wants to install a sidewalk cafe, you have to provide a 12-foot uninterrupted path that goes from one side of the sidewalk, one end of the sidewalk to the other end of the sidewalk. So, we want to, so that's going to be part of the application process. We will be, asking applicants, to, tell us where they want to put it before they install it, and then we'll review that. And if it doesn't meet the clear foot guidelines, then there won't be the ability to put it on the sidewalk. There might be the ability to put it on the roadway, but in locations like White Plains Road, Dyer Avenue, you have that high foot traffic. We're going to want 12 feet there, and it's going to be 12 feet, from one end of the sidewalk to the rest, to the other end.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do have one final thing, which is the noise issue or complaint. We have Woodlawn and we have Katona Avenue, which has a number of restaurants right on Katona Avenue. And we have received complaints from the homeowners that are just like on the side streets there. I guess the only comment, there's been long talk of equipping the NYPD since they're the ones responsible for enforcement of sound complaints, especially on this. And I know that I've read in the paper that, residents in Manhattan, especially in Lower Manhattan, have already filed lawsuits trying to stop this because of all the lawlessness surrounding this with homeless people and the noise. Maybe there can be consideration given to equipping the NYPD with sound meters so that when they respond to these types of complaints, they can actually write a summons. Right now, NYPD shows up for any noise complaint and they just give advice. They're not really enforcing anything. So, especially for the districts like Woodlawn, we've received complaints, and I don't want to penalize the restaurant, but I don't know how you avoid noise when you have 50 or so patrons that are outside eating and drinking and telling stories and stuff like that. I mean, it's just inevitable. But the cops are going to show up and they're going to be toothless because they can't write a summons unless they have a decibel reading. And the only people, as my understanding right now, that ride around with decibel level meters is DEP. It is not the NYPD. So it just seems a little, we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure if we don't give more tools to the NYPD to deal with these issues. That's it. I'm done.
Yeah, I'll just certainly say it's a very well point taken. I think the noise challenges are for sure one of the most complex and difficult. Obviously, pre-existing problem with the DEP PD relationship on the noise meters, pre-existing to COVID, but obviously with this many restaurants really, we're very mindful. I think that's an added challenge. And I think also Navarro spoke, enforcement in general has been really hard. I think during the emergency, I give our colleagues at DOT a lot of credit that they were able to build this extremely large program during an emergency circumstance, but they've also been building an enforcement regime while running, right? And so I think, one of the things we're mindful of is that the sooner we're able to return to a more regulated licensed state that has fees and process associated, the more that gives DOT the tools they need to revoke a license when there are bad actors. So that consequence of revocation is one thing that we think will help. Certainly, there's some other common sense things we've been talking about, like you don't need a sound meter to see that there are speakers or a TV in a setup. So we've seen a lot of amplified sound that has components to it, which is easier to inspect for or enforce against than the decibel noise. So those are certainly things that I think the teams are really mindful of and trying to build in as well. And I can just say, I think there's ongoing conversations on how to manage the PD, DEP, the enforcement elements here in an adequate way. And we'll certainly take your comments back on that as well.
And actually, I want to speak to one more piece about enforcement, which is that for the last year and a half, the inspectors that go out from DOT are being pulled from other parts of the agency that are also responsible to inspect, sidewalk conditions, roadway conditions, utility cuts. As part of the creation of a permanent program, what we plan to do is create a brand new unit within DOT that will be dedicated to the open restaurants program. And this unit will comprise of individuals who will manage the permit and application process, but will also include a dedicated team of street enforcement personnel that will be specifically dedicated to going out and checking restaurants and checking setups to make sure they're in compliance. And we will be able to use that, we hope, to also work with, NYPD and others on sound enforcement.
All right, so there are 3 more hands raised currently. I also just wanted to highlight something in the chat just to make sure that people see it, since it's related to what's being discussed right now. Uton from City Planning said, we are waiting for recommendations on open restaurants from the following community boards: 1, 5, 7, 11. Please reach out if you're having trouble with uploading your recommendation, and we'll provide assistance. So I just want to make sure that everyone, particularly anyone from those boards, saw that in the chat, and he dropped his email address in there as well. The next hand I saw was Dr. Bola. Go ahead and unmute.
Oh yeah, good morning, Madam Deputy and everyone else on the call. Thank you so much for this presentation. Actually, CB5 had a presentation yesterday, and of course we took our vote on it. But there was another question that came up, which one of our constituents wanted to know. Will there be allowed grilling to grill on the sidewalk when this is in place? I know the details are not yet out, but is that something that will go alongside with a gas? No, Judge, they asked question about the propane gas already. So will that be something like that on the sidewalk?
Unfortunately, or well, I should say, I think as many of us do enjoy some outdoor grilling, I think the concerns about propane from the FDNY for the restaurants also pertain to private use of propane. So I think that would still remain a concern and would not be part of this program. I would say more generally, and Navardo, please feel free to add to this, that the city is looking, and continuing to look through open streets and other street activity programs at ways to create a whole, more diversity. So while this program is really very specifically looking at restaurants and the restaurant, safe use of the roadway, actually, and again, today we're only really talking about the sidewalks, but eventually the roadway, that this is not the only program in DOT's toolkit for really thinking about different and varied uses of streets, but we're not specifically looking at grilling, and I think the propane would remain a concern for the FDNY.
Thank you.
All right, next hand I see is Robert Garmendes, CB4. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Well, part of my question was already answered with the sound. Now, the other question I had, and we had at the board meeting, was the alcohol drinking. Is it going to be now de facto legally to drink alcohol in the streets now because of this?
So the state liquor authority controls the liquor licenses, and that process is not being affected by anything we're doing here. I think right now the state has allowed for the extension of a liquor license to outdoor seating. I believe, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, that they have suspended the outdoor drinking rule more generally. So I know for some period during the emergency, you could get a to-go cup. I believe that's now not the case. But it is the case that you can be licensed for your outdoor seats. But that is through the same SLA licensure process that goes through the community boards.
That still doesn't. I can see them walking outside of the corral and then walking down the block with their drinks and so on and so forth. So please be aware of this. We all have to be aware of this because it's just going to open up that can of worms. Thank you.
All right, I see one more hand. Kira, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I just want to echo George's points about enforcement and the importance of it. This past summer, my board was put in a really tough position between residents complaining about business noise, live music outside, and also businesses. We try to be supportive of businesses, especially during the pandemic, and trying to, give them as much support as we can. So I don't know if this is the place of city planning and DC and DOT, but community boards should be part of those discussions about enforcement. Whether we think NYPD should have sound meters, whether we think licenses should be revoked. While you guys are planning that now, I think community boards should be part of that process, because we're put in the difficult position between listening to people's complaints and then listening to the store owners crying that they're going out of business because of tickets, because of noise. So it's just something important, I know, to CB8. And just one more point, a lot of this is a slap in the face to those residents who complain to us. It's like saying, okay, you've complained, but now we're making something like this permanent without any sort of corrective measures for them. That's all. Thank you.
And Kira hits Navarro, and I think those are all really good points. I would just say two things. One is, as I've said before and Carolyn said before, this is going to be a very long process to get from the temporary program that exists now to the more robust permanent program. And the other piece is that I think that once DOT has in place a dedicated enforcement unit, and once we have dedicated rules about a fine schedule, well, then it becomes a lot easier for DOT to go out and do something about the bad actors. Whereas right now, I will fully recognize that our response has been slow and not ideal, but we don't have dedicated staff to handle enforcement. Once we have that staff, once we have that personnel, then it'll be a lot easier to deal. I know you and I have discussed a couple of the bad actors in Board 8 over the past year and a half. In the future, it'll be a lot easier for us to go out and enforce against bad behavior, and to even potentially revoke a license if someone is a repeated bad actor. But I do think that, and in fact, I'm actually attending, Board 8's Economic Development Committee meeting tonight. So we are going to be working with you going forward on how to make sure this is enforced properly.
Thank you.
May I speak? I'm also from Community Board 8. Laura. I believe I had my hand up if I did it correctly.
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay. I'm a little confused. You had mentioned that businesses can apply for hardship to allow for winter use. Under the temporary program that's in effect now, how has the coordination been with Department of Sanitation regarding snow removal? And moving into the permanent, the same thing. It seems to me that businesses under the permanent will have to remove all of their edifices. Can you clarify that?
Yeah,
About the
yes,
seasonality?
yes, Laura. Thank you for the question. Under the future program, the roadway setups will generally be removed during the winter months. The sidewalks are a different matter, and those will be allowed to remain, but the roadway setups would be required to be removed in the winter unless they go through this hardship waiver, which is really still being developed, but the general, intent is that somebody could, would be able to store their materials, in the curb if they could show that it was financially, impossible for them to put the materials somewhere else. That is still intended to be an edge case. So the majority of the setups would be intended to be removed during the winter for precisely the reason you identify, snow removal, as well as we spoke about, it allows for the coordination of other important street infrastructure, right? So, you can have more of your road repaving occurring when they're all removed. Versus now, where that rule is not in place, we have seen the setups remaining during winter months, and we've seen very permanent setups, right? Full buildings, things nailed into the ground, technically not allowed, but happening in many, many cases that is intended to not continue.
All right, right. We see that now, and I'm just thinking of the hardship of trying to dismantle these
Right.
setups that they have.
Which is
But
why
for the temporary, they don't have to dismantle right now.
that's correct. And it's
Okay.
why I think the design rules for the roadway program are going to be really important. And I think there will be really good opportunities for the community board to participate in the shaping of that, because we're going to be asking restaurants to have more removable setups than they currently have, but we still want them to be safe and interesting and attractive, right? So we note things, for instance, the water barriers that we see many sites using are very heavy when they're full of water and very light and movable when they're emptied, right? Which is a really good design solution for somebody who needs to be very substantial and safe, but also ultimately needs to store those barriers somewhere. So there's opportunities like that, like fabric roofs, things, different design elements, pardon me, that are still attractive, but are not the full houses that I think we've seen a lot of.
Thank you. Based on what you're saying, we have a particular street that has a lot of restaurant edifices built out, and DEP needs to do some work on that street. Seems to me from this conversation, we should tell the restaurant, we should wait until the permanent, because they're going to have to be taken down then, and not try to have them take it down now. You know what I mean? It's because it's going to be part of it. So this has been helpful. Thank you.
All right, I do not see any other hand. Roberto Crespo, I see your hand is back up. Did you have another question?
Yeah, it's more of a concern than a question on the emergency status right now. I've seen, and I know that I have one in community board too, where they have put these kiosks on the street. It's been abandoned. It's become a nuisance to the community. You have people doing drugs in there. You have people having sex in there, drinking in that abandoned kiosk. And I know that this, nothing's going to be done until the street side of the amendment comes up. But something has to be done by DOT, because it's really getting out of hand. I don't know if any of the other boards are suffering from the same, but just the other day, the police commissioner was on TV stating to the fact that these abandoned kiosks are also creating a problem throughout the city. So is DOT planning to do anything about these abandoned kiosks?
We do have measures to remove bad actors. I mean, this is something that's in coordination with the mayor's office. So, Chair Crespo, if you could, I could reach out to you, get the specific locations in your district, and then reach out to our contacts at City Hall about next steps.
Thank you, Commissioner.
This is Arlene Parks. May I be recognized?
Yes.
Thank you. In my district, all along the 138th Street corridor, we have a highly trafficked area that is being impacted by all of the DOT changes in the roads that are causing serious issues with traffic congestion and parking. And we also have serious issues with public safety along that corridor as well. So my question is, as it relates to the issue that we're considering, what now can we expect DOT to do along the corridor in terms of enforcement? Because when you have a lot of truck deliveries along that corridor, traffic comes to a standstill. So if you take parking offline for these cafes or restaurants, that's exacerbating traffic conditions in the district from the Madison Avenue Bridge all the way up to the Bruckner corridor. And so we've expressed concerns so many times about no parking in the district. And there are concerns about what impact this program will have to exacerbate that and the traffic congestions that we already have. And then we also have the issue of so many restaurants between, say, Brook Avenue all the way down to Willis Avenue, that it is, you can't see clearly down 138th Street, and it's a public safety concern.
Sheriff Parks, thank you for your question. With regarding to deliveries, we always try to work with businesses to sort of create loading zones, and that is something that we can continue to do in Community Board 1 about making sure that there are places where delivery trucks can deliver to the curb without taking up a lane of traffic. It's a solution that we find works well in a lot of places. I would also want to point out that under the permanent program, we are going to tighten those guidelines with regards to sight lines. Something that we've already heard not just from you, but also from our partner agencies at the fire department and also the MTA. So the new guidelines for roadway seating that we're going to develop is going to have that in mind to make sure that there are clear paths, not just on the sidewalk, but also clear sight lines for vehicles in the roadway.
And I'll just add that, again, the community boards will have an opportunity to provide feedback and engage on that process of the design guidelines developed for the roadway. That's not the action that's in front of the board today, which is specific to the locations of sidewalk cafes and allowing those extra areas to participate. But those roadway rules, which will be in development over the next 6 months or so, there will be many opportunities to help shape those as well.
Arlene, just so you know, I just had to mute your mic real quick because I was getting an echo as our presenter spoke.
The question is, what real role will community boards have in advance of DOT making a decision to grant a cafe at a particular location?
So separate and apart from what we just described about shaping the rules, when
Correct.
each application comes through, there will be notifications, there will be public hearings, and there's an individual review for each application.
Thank you.
All right, Deputy, I do not see any other raised hands at this time.
Okay, great. I thank our presenters for that presentation, as well as answering our questions. We'll now move to voting on the open restaurants text amendment. And we'll do so in a roll call vote. Also, to be clear, we will our chairs of community boards will be voting, as well as council members or their reps. At this time, there will be yes, no, or abstain, and we will go down the votes much like we did our roll call earlier. And we'll begin with Community Board 1. May we have your vote?
I have to abstain because Community Board 1 has not voted on the matter. But I would have voted no, but I've been advised to abstain until Community Board 1 cast its vote.
Okay, thank you
So
very
I'm
much.
abstaining at this time.
Thank you. Community Board 2. You might need to unmute yourself, Community Board 2.
Community Board 2, thank you, Madam Chair, reminding me that I was muted. we vote yes with the caveat that it's only sidewalk and that there's a community board involvement throughout the entire process.
Okay, Community Board 3.
Hello.
Maybe someone else needs to unmute themselves. Community Board 3.
I thought my chair was on, but as representing Community Board 3, we voted yes.
Okay, just checking in with Marisol. Is Dr. Rivera on?
Right, he was.
Yeah, unfortunately, Ms. Ritter can't vote on behalf of the board.
Right.
So, Etta, if you can reach out to, oh, he is on.
I thought he was on. That's what I was waiting for him.
Yeah.
He's on?
Okay,
he's
so
on
we'll
according
just
to
move
this.
on
Yes.
with the vote and let's try to reach him and then we'll come back at the end of the vote to Community Board 3. And since I thought it was November and it's still October, someone remind me if I forget. Community Board 4, may we have your vote?
Yeah, Community Board 4 voted yes, but we would like to be involved in all aspects of this going forward.
Thank you. Community Board 5.
Yes, Madam Deputy, thank you. We vote yes, vote 5.
Thank you. Community Board 6. May we have your vote? Okay. Community Board 7. Okay. Community.
I apologize, Madam Chair. Dr. Bruce Rivera, Board 3 Chair, yes.
You are voting yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. No need for apologies. These things happen. We are now currently at Community Board 8.
Community Board 8 felt too many details were lacking. It's no.
Thank you. Community Board 9.
Good morning, Madam Deputy. I'm sorry, unfortunately, our chair isn't on. We had previously voted favorably with conditions, but our chair wasn't able to log in.
Okay. That's unfortunate, but thank you. Community Board 10.
Yes, Community Board 10 votes yes with the provision that we're only referring to sidewalk and that community boards will be continued to be involved in the review of the applications. Thank you.
Thank you. Community Board 11. Okay. And last but not least, Community Board 12.
Community Board 12 votes in the affirmative, Madam Deputy.
Thank you very much. Council members, Council Member Ayala. Okay. Council Member Denowitz. Council Member Riley. I'm not sure if I'm hearing people speaking or some type of feedback.
Yeah, I thought someone was speaking. My apologies, Madam Deputy. This is Councilmember Riley's office. We are voting in the affirmative and echoing the sentiments of our local community boards, which are 10, 11, and 12. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Jonai. Councilmember Cabrera.
Yes.
Okay, no preamble, just yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Felix. And Councilmember Gibson. And Councilmember Salamanca.
I, Shannon Knotts here on behalf of Councilmember Salamanca, voting no. And the reason for this vote is because the council member feels that the local community boards do not have enough teeth in this process when it concerns such text amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, again, Councilmember Diaz Senior's office. Okay, so do we have a result of the vote, Marisol? This is a part of the beauty contest when we go to the tabulation and we see who won. In this case, it's a resolution, but let's see.
Marisol may have stepped out. I did. It's Tom Lucania. I'm sorry. The vote was 7 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative, and with 1 abstention. So it passed.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you. I see. Always depend on the borough president's office to have a plan B. Okay. So the text amendment passes, and we'll move to our next agenda item. Again, I apologize. Technology is not our friend today, or at least not my friend today. See if I can get to our next presenters. Just to make sure, Chris, do we have our next presenters on? Are you familiar?
I believe they are on. I think they have another meeting to get to relatively soon. So hopefully
okay, so let's
we can
hurry.
Squeeze them in real quick. But
yep.
The folks from emergency management.
Yes, and this is going
FEMA.
to be initiatives and resources available as it relates to Hurricane Ida. And please introduce yourselves as you begin your presentation from the New York City Emergency Management and also FEMA.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Borough President. My name is Jocarina Duarte. I am Director for Government Relations at New York City Emergency Management. And good morning to everyone that is in this meeting today. I know we're joined by my colleagues at FEMA as well, so I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, good morning. My name is Tamara Sendral, and I am a subject matter expert for the Individual and Household Program. Today, we're here just to answer any questions and talk about eligibility requirements if there are any doubts. One of the most important things that we're exhorting all of the community, if you have not done so already, is to apply for FEMA assistance. You have to be in one of the presidentially declared areas. And we have assistance in the individual and household program for both owners and renters. I will be available till the end of the presentation for any questions or doubt. And my colleague from SBA is also on, who will provide some information of the program.
Thank you, Tamara. And on behalf of the city, I just want to say that the city is working closely with the state and the federal government to provide assistance to those that were affected. We're working with FEMA to staff the improvised services to the resources center. The one in the Bronx is open at the Hostel Community College, the East Academic Complex. It's been opened a few days after the incident occurred, and ever since FEMA declared the Bronx part of the state of emergency. The reason why it's in Hostel, and I know in conversation with many of the community boards have questions about why is it in Hostel, might be a little bit too outside of where different districts are. And the reason why it's in there is because we work very closely with our state and federal partners to provide a hub that is outside of the area that was affected. And as I mentioned in previous presentation to all the community boards, I just want to reiterate that even though this is outside of many of your boards, people that were affected can call 311 to request transportation from and to the center. So again, if you were affected and you still haven't gone to one of the recovery center, you can call 311 to request transportation to and from the center. The centers are open at, like I said, Hostel Community College, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Saturday. In addition to that, I know FEMA also have the Mobile Disaster Recovery Center available. And I'll let FEMA to talk about the locations and the hours of operation. And last but not least, I want to mention two other things that the city have done. So on September 26th, in conjunction with the governor's office, the mayor's office announced $27 million that is available to provide disaster assistance for undocumented New Yorkers. So anyone that needs the help, please, we encourage you, no doesn't matter your status, to go to the service center, call 311, or visit our webpage to get this assistance. I have shared the link on the chat, so you can grab it from there and help us promote this information. In addition to that, after the Hurricane Ida, or Tropical Ida, actually hit the city, the mayor's office released a new report that outline different initiatives that the city is going to take moving forward to ensure that we're better prepared for any other extreme weather event. Some of this initiative that was outlined in the report means a severe weather task force, which is different than our flash flood plan that we already have currently. This means that more agencies are going to be part of this plan, and we're going to consult once we have sorry for that. Once we have, any indication that we're going to experience any severe weather in the city. In addition to that, we're going to be looking at in addition to working with the National Weather Service, we're going to be looking at other private forecasting services to kind of make sure that the prediction is up to date and is the most accurate as possible. And when it comes to messaging, we're going to continue doing, messaging a little bit more aggressively this time when it comes to different channels, press release, notifying YC, and maybe word alert. Also the report, which you also have the link on the chat, outlines additional projects that is going to be continue to be funded, or projects that we're looking forward to implement in the city to ensure that the city is not affected by extreme weather. As of November 5th, we have served 4,731 households that have received assistance within the 5 boroughs. Again, this is October 5th. I will be sharing the most accurate data once I receive it to the borough president's office so they can share. And we've been in constant communication with everyone, and as always, we continue to be available to community board president, and our local partners. So if you need to reach out to us, we're always here to assist and answer any concern. And now I'll pass it over to our colleagues at FEMA if they want to add anything else.
Okay, I'm going to piggyback off of what Ms. Duarte said. Our disaster recovery centers are available for visits. The mobile disaster recovery centers will begin working throughout Queens. The way the mobile DRCs work is they go from county to county and set up so that if there is not a disaster recovery closer to you, we are going to get closer to where you can go. Due to the fact that we're coming to the end of the year, November, December, it's going to be colder months. The disaster recovery coordination team is working with each individual county, because the mobile does not necessarily have to be a moving vehicle or van. It can be, we can go to community centers, we can go to town halls, we can set up and bring staff that are qualified to assist the community. So there'll be more of that coming up. External Affairs will definitely put that information out there as we get more clarity on how that's going to work coming into the colder months, so that we don't have staff or a survivor standing outside in the cold while they get assistance. The FEMA Individual and Household Program has different financial assistance for those affected by Ida. And like I mentioned, I'm going to stick around till the end of the presentation. I just want to give you kind of an overall view of the program for right now. I know there's probably a lot of other presentations that will take place, but I will stick around till the end so that if you have specific questions about program or funding or how we are providing long-term recovery, feel free to let me know. The chat is also available and I can answer questions if that needs to be done through there. I will leave you with SBA representative. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Tamara. Appreciate the introduction. We are an integral part of the disaster recovery effort, and even though the words small business are in our name, please do not be misled by that. When a disaster strikes and is declared by the president or our administrator, we make low interest loans to all categories of disaster survivors. That includes homeowners, renters, nonprofit organizations, and of course, small businesses and even large businesses from time to time. It's important that you register with FEMA first. They are the overall coordinator of the relief effort, in addition to having several programs of their own that Tamara has alluded to. Many of you will then be referred to the Small Business Administration. If you are referred, it's vital that you fill out and return your application either in person or online or at one of our disaster recovery centers. The reason for this is if we look at the application and can offer you a loan, that's another tool in your recovery toolkit. There's no obligation to accept it. There's no cost to apply. On the other hand, if we look at it and say a loan would not be appropriate for you because of your financial circumstances, for example, we will then refer you back to FEMA, potentially for additional grant assistance. However, if you don't return the application, the process stops, and you're essentially saying, I'm fine where I am. If you are, that's great. If you're not, don't deny yourself this potential additional assistance. Fill out the application and get it back to us. We have, as of last night, close of business, approved $115.6 million in loans for the 9 New York counties that are declared. Most of that goes to the first 8. We just added Dutchess last week, I believe it was. So they're a little bit behind the other 8, but the money is getting out there into the street. People are using it to repair, rebuild, and recover, and that's our intent. We want to help as many people as possible. So again, the first step is, if you haven't done so already, encourage your constituents to register with FEMA, either online or at one of the disaster recovery centers. Fill out the applications and let us work you through the process to see what help we can have sent your direction. Again, I'll stick around to the end of the program, and if you have any additional questions for SBA, I will be happy to field them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that concludes our presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, does anyone have any questions? Please raise your hand virtually. Also, what's been working is putting your questions in the comment section as well. Chris, do we have any hands raised?
One so far, Roberto Crespo, go ahead.
Oh, bless you too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for recognizing me again, and I'm sorry, but to all 3 presenters, I'm a homeowner, and Community Board 2 is about 1/3 of private homeowners, and we've been getting a lot of inquiries as to the program for homeowners. Some have problems paying their mortgage. Some are having problems because they had to use the money to make repairs in the houses. And so I've spoken to our congressmen, I've spoken to our senators, I've spoken to everybody, and they all say, yeah, the money's in the budget, the money's in the budget, but nobody has come out to the community board or boards to discuss at least the homeowner segment of how homeowners can apply for this money.
I'll go ahead and speak on FEMA's behalf and how FEMA works. When you apply with FEMA, you can apply as a homeowner. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to verify if you have any type of insurance coverage. Why? Because we cannot duplicate benefits. So if there's an insurance coverage, we first need to know whether or not you will be receiving assistance from the insurance before we proceed to provide any financial assistance for home repairs. FEMA works in 2 ways. We may provide home repair assistance for the damages of the home. These damages, what do we consider? We consider essential living areas, okay? So there's many things that take place when we make a decision after you have registered. Every case is individual. It's case by case. Every household construction is different. Household composition is different. Income of a household is different. There's many different criteria that have to be taken into consideration. So the most important thing is, have you applied? Did you apply for FEMA? FEMA, once you apply, will work with you to refer you to the different programs, including the Small Business Administration. If there's something that's not covered under FEMA, that may be an option for you. But again, every household is different, so many of the cases are very individual. That's why we set up the disaster recovery centers. We have our FEMA helpline so that we can work one-on-one with each family. One of the things that we will work is not duplicate benefits. So if you do have insurance and you have not reached out to the insurance, that's going to be key. You have to know what was covered by insurance. And then if there's something that is not covered and it is covered by FEMA, after we have inspected the home, then we may be able to provide assistance. I always like to say when we talk in a forum like this, where there's many people, because every scenario is different, just reach out to FEMA. Go to the disaster recovery centers, call the FEMA helpline, let us enter your file, just look at the information so that we can get a bigger picture and then work with you one-on-one. If you do not agree with FEMA decision, you always have the right to appeal, but an appeal for household A may not be the same for household B. So once again, that's the importance of really getting in contact with us so that we can guide you through the process, seeing what was said at the time of inspection, seeing how many things were reported at the time of inspection, and then we take it from there. And this is one of the reasons why we do these presentations and we come out to the communities and talk, because yes, there's a lot of information that's given from the moment the disaster happens to the recovery process that kind of sometimes is different. So we do these meetings so that we can really provide you the guidance that you need so we can work on an individual basis with each and every one of you. Thank you for the question.
And
to bicycle onto that, if I may, it's Carl Dombeck from SBA. If you are referred to the SBA, fill out that application. Mr. Crespo alluded to people who have already funded their own repairs and such. If you're approved for an SBA loan, you can certainly reimburse yourself or pay off your credit card if that's what you use to pay for the repairs. That's a perfectly legitimate use of loan funds. As long as you have receipts, you're good. Keep those in the event of an audit. But if you took money out of savings, if you used a credit card or whatever, then pay it off with the low interest loan that if you're approved for would be at like 1.563% for homeowners and renters. Again, in addition to the low interest rate, the first payment on these loans are deferred 18 months. That's a year and a half that you have to make the repairs before we ask you to start paying it back. That's intended to help make recovery affordable. So the first step is register with FEMA. The second, if you are referred to SBA, to fill out that application, because we may be able to get you some assistance that will help you either fund the repairs in the first place or reimburse what you've already paid for. Now, like FEMA, we can't duplicate benefits. So if you have insurance, we can look at the gap between what your insurance covers and what your total need is. But we don't need you to have to wait for the insurance to settle. In fact, we recommend you do not wait for a settlement. File your claim, of course, but then come to us and work with us, and we'll coordinate with your insurance company as necessary.
And also to piggyback on what is being said, again, everyone has a different situation, and there's a lot of people that we have seen at the center that didn't know services were being provided, or they went for something and needed something else, and they happened to get all of the help all in one shop. That's why we have this center created. So we encourage everyone just to go and get the services, because there might be services that you didn't know you were entitled to that you might find out by attending to this recovery center. Also want to give a shout out to some of our colleagues at the city agency who has been staffing this center, like HRA, DEP. A lot of the other agencies are at some point were staffing the service center. These are people that you have been talking in a normal basics that have taken their time off from their office schedule to staff the service center to provide, quality, services to the residents and all the 4 boroughs that the center were open on. So thank you to all my colleagues at the city agencies for attending as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I see there's a lot of great information being dropped into the chat. So please, everyone, take a moment, look in there, especially on this topic. If you, I see some links, I see some contact information. So please check in the chat. Are there any other questions, Chris?
I don't see any other hands raised at this time.
Okay. Excellent. So we just want to thank you again for your presentation, for also being there for the residents of the Bronx, especially in a disaster such as this. And we want to thank you again for being here today. And we're going to move to our next part of our agenda, which is announcements. I know that we have our first announcement, which will include the IRS expanded tax credit notice. So we're going to have someone speak about that first, and that is Brenda Luke Stewart. And I thought I saw her. So if you could just unmute yourself. Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Jump on in.
I won't take too much time, but I thank you for the invitation to attend and present. My name is Senior Stakeholder Liaison Brenda Luke. I'm out of 290 Broadway. I am the relationship manager for IRS for the Bronx. The Bronx is what I cover. And I really need you as leaders in the community to help get this information out to the community. It's about the advanced child tax credit. We have a project where we're trying to reach out to all the parents. Oh, you got my presentation. Thank you. Okay. Can you can share the slides as well? Okay, so basically this is to get the 2021 advanced child tax credit. And this is a call to action to everyone, really, as leaders to be able to help. Next slide. Basically, what it's done, it increased the maximum credit amount. It makes the credit fully refundable, and it removes the minimum income requirement, and it provides advance payments. That's the key word. This is an advance payments to parents that have children under the age of 6. They would get, as we're going to go further to see, they would receive $300 each month. And if they're under the age of 17, it would be 200. Now, what we're going to talk about, what is the requirements? First of all, they would have to be a United States resident, and that's where they would have lived for the last 6 months. They also, with this rescue plan, which is really good, it included individuals that actually had an ITIN number, or the taxpayer identification number. So that means that these residents would not necessarily have to have a social security number. So if they're filing a joint return, a valid ITIN number for the husband and wife, they could claim their own children to apply to get this advanced child tax credit. Also, the other requirement was for 2021 adjusted income. It meant that there was no limit. This could also be individuals perhaps that receive public assistance. It could be income, no income, zero income. So these individuals typically that would not apply for the credit because it would be that the fact that you would have to work. So these are advantages, and also you would have to have a qualifying child to actually apply for the child tax credit. Next slide. These advanced payments started as of July 15th, and they will continue until December 15th. So remember, this is 50% of the estimated 2021 credit that you would receive next year. So you're getting half of that payment in advance, effective as of July 15th until December 15th. Next slide. Qualifying child, as we discussed, you have to file a paper return. We have a tool on irs.gov, which is called Free File, that you can actually go into filing. And we also had a portal where you could just put your information. We'll talk more about that portal. Our portal closed as of now, but I will also give you additional information in which you can actually utilize, or please share this with your people in your community. Next slide. Again, this is advantage. We want you to take advantage. You, as leaders in the community, you can actually go forward and talk to people that are in your community. As a representative for the Bronx, I'm not aware, but we had the issue, or what we had as a program all the school districts. So I was responsible for all the school districts in the Bronx to send a letter or to make them aware so that they could let the parents know. A lot of the parents are not aware that their children is entitled to this money. Also, with this Rescue Act, a lot of people did not receive all the economic impact payment. This still allowed for them to go forward with claiming the $1,200, the $1,400, or the $600 that they were entitled to. This is per child. So please, I know that you know of people that need this money, and also we'll talk later also that they will not be scammed. We're here to help you get this money for the people in your community. Next slide. As we said, you're required to file a 2019 return. And also, if you have children that are born this year, you still are required and you still are eligible. So you still can claim this. As we discussed, if you did not get the full amount for this payment, the economic impact payment, this allows you also to use this tool. Next slide. This is talking about the free file. You can go on irs.gov and it's a free file that you can actually utilize this to go ahead and go forward with claiming this credit. Next slide. Now, Code America is another option because our portal is closed that you can go in and you can complete and access information. You can also use a mobile phone, and we're looking for you as leaders in the community. Maybe you can help people. Maybe there's a language barrier to understand. Maybe they may not even be aware of it. You can encourage them. This PowerPoint can be shared. Also, afterwards, I thank Marisol for forwarding it and the opportunity to speak because it is so important for people to go ahead and claim the money that they're entitled to. Next slide. I can send you, and I would love to forward this so that you can be a part of this mission. We have publications, we have forms that you can forward to the people in your community. Maybe they can hang it up. Maybe in the restaurants, maybe in the schools that make everyone aware of this child tax credit. We still have two more payments to go out. And I'm sure there are individuals that can need this money, maybe to buy items for their children, but the holidays are coming. And with the money that's given, there's no designation to say that you can't buy other things. This is to help your children. Next slide. Again, this is an advanced child credit. This is to help people that's in need. And we need you to help us. Next slide. Again, this is additional information that we share here. And the next slide. Again, we're asking for your help. I need you to help the community. Representing, I'll put my contact information in the chat. Anything that you need, think that you have a friend at the IRS. I am here to represent you. But we need to get this information out to the community to make them aware that they have money waiting for them. All they have to do is to go about and claim this money. So it is important because if we don't use it, it's like saying we don't need it. But we know that the vulnerable communities, we have certain communities that are underserved, may not realize that they're entitled to it. Please help us get this out to the community. Next slide. One of the things I want to say, don't become scammed. You have a lot of organizations saying, oh, I know you deserve this money. You're supposed to get it. I will help you get it quicker. So they're looking for your information to make this happen. Please do not fall victim to this, and please speak to the people in your community about this because there's no other way to go except through the IRS. They cannot make it go quicker, but they are looking for your information. And if they get your information, there it goes. They have your children's social as well as your bank account. As a matter of fact, speaking on that, one thing that last year when we sent out the economic impact payment, a lot of individuals thought the letters that they received was actually scams, and they threw away the document. We may send the information by direct debit card. So please be aware that this information is coming to you. Once you apply and put your information into into our website, what may happen, you may get a direct debit card or you may get a check, but you can also upload your bank account information. Next slide. Again, we have articles that we can have if you'd like to please put on your website. We appreciate so much participation with the Borough President's Office. They have always been so helpful. So again, just like now, please continue to do this. Next slide. This is information about this portal, Code America, the portal that you can use. You would put the qualifying child. Just think you can use your smartphone because a lot of people may not have computers, and it's very simple and it's easy. So again, you would want to identify the children, and this is children that you claim, not letting somebody else claim. And also, you can unenroll. Now, if you decide that you want to wait till next year to get the full amount of money, and if you're married, realize both husband and wife have to unenroll. So it is important to realize two things, a couple of things. First of all, it is an advance payment. If you're going to unenroll, husband and wife have to unenroll. And also the fact is, do not get scammed by other people. And you can always go to Code America's website. This is what the Department of the Treasury is using. Next slide. Again, let's make more families aware of this eligibility. I need you to help the community. I will put my contact information in there. Please, please, please help us help the community in which you serve, because I know that there are many people that need this money, and it's truly important for them to get this out to the community. I thank you so much for allowing me to talk about this, and let's help everybody get this money before the end of the year. Thank you. If they have any questions, I'll put my contact information.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation. I'm especially excited to know that I have a friend at the IRS.
Yes, yes, yes.
That, if nowhere else, I'm happy to have a friend at the IRS. And if there are, please check in the chat for Ms. Stewart's information so you can ask her questions, reach out to her. Are there any other announcements that the board would like to, board members would like to bring up, or also anyone, any agencies?
So I saw two things. Laura Spalter's hand was raised, but it isn't now. But Laura, if you did have anything, go ahead. And if not, that's okay. And then Jermaine.
So sorry. I'm so sorry. Yep, my hand was up. I just have a request that perhaps on November's agenda, there was a new law that was sent to us, Tom, on the open meetings law. And I was wondering if we could have a discussion on how that impacts community boards resolutions and how we comply with that new open meetings law. It goes into effect November
19th.
Yeah.
I believe there should be an anticipated correspondence on that coming up that should come to you even before the meeting. So the ideal situation would be to get that correspondence to you and the rest of the board members before that date, and it should come to you soon and before the next meeting. So once you have that in hand and had the opportunity to have those conversations, I don't know if you might feel like we still need to discuss it, but if so, we'll do so at that time.
Hi, Deputy. It's Tom. Laura, as Deputy mentioned, I'm preparing a memo for the board chairs and DMs as it has come to me from the state office on open government, this really isn't a very drastic change from what is already required by the open meeting law, but I will provide you with a memo that clarifies it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. See, we didn't forget. We're working on it. Any other hands?
Yeah, Jermaine Williams, DSS had raised his hand.
Hey, good morning / almost afternoon, everyone. As always, it's a pleasure to see everyone, Madam Chair. So Jermaine Williams, Department of Social Services, 2 quick announcements, actually 3, but 2 right now. The first one is we continue to advocate and push clients to apply for ERAP if they suffered from back rent or back utility expenses from the month of March of 2020 to present. It's all conversations that is ending soon and money's run out, but again, it's always good to apply first as a first protocol because the money doesn't have to be paid back. Once individuals come to HRA, they do have to sign a repayment agreement, and most of the time, individuals are reluctant to do that. Outside of that, October 7th, landlords will actually offer the opportunity to apply for the rent program through LRAP, which is New York State Landlord Rental Assistance Program, which provide up to 12 months of past rent for landlords whose tenants decline to apply for the ERAP program, or they left the property, leaving the landlord stuck with the old rent. They're offering a 45-day priority for landlords with fewer than 20 units, and landlords are encouraged to gather all the information they can to provide. And I will send this to Marisol just in case you guys want to put it on your website as an e-blast because it has hyperlinks and sometimes it doesn't come up in the chat. Lastly, I'm sorry to say this will be my last meeting with you. I took a position with Staten Island Ambassador, so I will be starting with NYPD starting November 1st. So it was a good run and a bittersweet moment for me because I learned so much of my skill sets and an ability to serve the community as well as I do from my colleagues and partners. So it's going to be a bittersweet moment for me. So I hope everybody stays, take care, and I may cross paths in the future.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. I actually have a question in terms of the landlords that receive or file for rental assistance. Is the tenant or former tenant notified that the landlord has reached out? Or
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm assuming your question is based on double dipping, like the landlord, no, the tenant did it, and also the land. So that was also concerns that came
No,
up.
actually, it's not that the tenant did it and the landlord did it. Is that the tenant left under certain circumstances, perhaps even believing a deposit or something has covered a last month of rent, but the landlord says, "Hey, I can get
now
for
apply.
for this and
Right.
the other, throw a wider net." How do we know that that's not happening?
Well, the good thing is that this is for the state to really determine because HRA has nothing to do with that part. But for the most part, I know through the ERAP process, the landlord would have to agree that the client has to stay there for a year if they accept the ERAP money. So that was also one of the concerns that came up because sometimes the landlord may not want the tenant there, but does want the money they're entitled to since the client hasn't been paying the rent. So I'm assuming from this point with the landlords doing it, it might give a different perspective where if the client left, then it's fine because the landlord wanted the client gone possibly, but he still wanted to apply for it. But at the same time, if the client still wants to remain there, it would still be for the state to determine like who will file for the process first because this started for the ERAP started back in I want to say May. So now the opportunity for the landlord actually just started. So if anything, I'm assuming the first come first serve process would go into effect. If I answered your question,
Is there a way that someone can check
oh,
a list of landlords that say that have applied?
no, not that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, because
not that I know
I
of.
can think of a scenario where a landlord, not any landlords in the Bronx, of course, but uh, in other places, unscrupulous landlords who a person leaves the apartment thinking, okay, I'm gone, I can't afford it. They aren't really, the landlord isn't really out rent, but they say, well, I didn't get the next month's rent, and therefore I'm going to try to get a payment from the
From the
state,
program.
and there's no one to contradict whatever self-serving records they may have. Well,
Well, I'm still
again, not that this would happen in the Bronx,
right, but I'm
but
hoping
in
that
other
the state
places.
would be able to, like, because if anything, the landlord would have to give information for the individual that was living there, and hopefully their database will run. Okay, wait, no, the client actually did apply for this, and we did issue payment, so the landlord technically isn't entitled to that because he already
But
had it.
if the client or the tenant doesn't know anything about it, they're gone. They went back to stay with mom and dad because they knew they couldn't afford it. And
Mhm.
then the landlord, who has 10 other maybe legitimate situations, says, hey, I can also do these other three. Anyway, I don't want to drill down
No,
too
no, it's
far,
okay.
but
So, what I'll do, I'll actually just to follow up, find out if there's a tracking mechanism that the state has to make sure that there's um information not being requested after a client left on behalf of the client, which almost would still be there. I mean, I don't know if it would be responsible for it because again, it's a grant, but just to make sure landlords are not being scrupulous, like you said, and applying on behalf of a client that already left the apartment thinking
and
everything was
that they're
paid in
already
full.
going after
Right.
through private means, because they could still
Correct.
be doing that as well.
Okay. I'll find out.
People in other boroughs.
They getting them in trouble.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, hands raised?
I do not see any.
I think that we're all committed to having these meetings end around noon. So we are, so no one's asking any questions, but I think that that's it. We do not have any other business for the board. I thank you all for coming as usual. I thank you all for your service. It's great to see you guys again. Also, the folks that I saw at our new new members orientation board meeting orientation. I thank you for participating in that that as well. And yeah, someone said happy Halloween, and probably a little bit more important, happy election. Make sure everybody goes out and votes, and we don't care who you vote for, just that you exercise the franchise.